Ready to roll?
Let's go, baby!
Let's go, baby. Where are we dropping?
Where are we dropping?
Yo, Team White Tees today.
Let's go.
Team White Tees.
The White Tea Boys!
Hello and welcome back to the Net Gains podcast. I am one of your hosts, Roger Parent. I am an ex-CEO, former pro athlete, and father of three. I'm joined here by my other co-host, Mr. Frank Field, who currently works at one of my companies while competing on the AVP Pro Beach Volleyball Tour. Frank, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're talking about perfectionism. This is something that Roger and I both experience a lot in our lives, and I think a lot of people experience it in general. So we wanted to talk about what perfectionism is, and especially how to use it to your advantage.
Nice. I'm ready to dive in when you are.
Yeah, well, really quick, I want to touch on something first that we actually talked about in Slack earlier this week, because I was listening to news, and basically the EU is going to change their migrant policy and where these people go and which countries take them, a bunch of like whatever random stuff. But I was curious about it, and I asked you, do you think it's the responsibility of Western countries to take migrants from these war countries? Because it happens a lot. And you gave a really interesting response. So I'm just going to sit back and relax and let you take the show.
Well, first of all, you said you were listening to news. That's your first mistake. You just don't need news.
NPR, though. I know. Are you pro or anti-NPR? I don't know if we've talked about that.
I'm like, I don't know. I'm anti all media, man.
Yeah.
It's just, there really is no real way to get unbiased news. You just like have to consistently check opposing sides. And even when you do that, it's like they are only elevating the most outrageous takes from the other side. And you just get stuck in this war of ridiculousness. So it's like whatever the different sort of media outlets agree on is like truth typically. So you try to like discern facts from like, okay, like this happened in this, like an earthquake happened over here. Like I can discern that fact, but it's like, it was caused by this. It was because of this and they did this. And it was like, unless they all agree, I'm just assuming they're all lying.
Yeah. I like to think that NPR is a little more neutral just because it's publicly funded. They disclose all their sponsors. But, their audience is, I think, like 92% liberal. So why wouldn't they tell stories that their liberal audience wants to hear? So, like, I totally get that. I don't know. Maybe I'm just biased and I like them, but it's not fully unbiased.
That just shows it, right? Like, I don't know. It's an interesting thing. But anyway, I think like going back to your question, like, do we have a human responsibility to take in migrants? I don't want to get like crazy political, but I just feel like humans have a responsibility to be kind and help others. And too often our governments who are incentivized to be corrupt in a variety of ways stop like kindness from happening. Like I think I brought up an example of like when the Ukraine war started, like I was trying to house people and I just couldn't figure out how to do it. Like I couldn't get in touch with anybody. I couldn't it was like they needed, tons and tons of like red tape to be able to just get shelter. Right. And I think you brought up another example, but I forgot about it. I think you brought up something.
I had seen something similar, it was interesting to hear that. I mean, you had told too that you went and tried to donate masks to people, and you did a bunch of stuff during COVID. I had a year in 2021 when I was working at a Panera Bread pretty often, and I saw how much food waste they would just throw out, like all of this food just getting thrown in the trash. So, one day I asked, can I just take some of this food and donate it or give it to a homeless shelter or a food kitchen or whatever? And they told me no, that there's just laws in terms of, like food sanitation and stuff that they can't give it to me. So I had never really thought about it like that until I heard your story too, that there's just a lot of red tape in between straight up just doing a good deed, like how crazy is that? I don't know. I wonder if anyone in the audience has stories like that too. We'd love to hear about it. But I wonder how common that is, that people try to do good things and are just stopped by the laws that we have in place.
Yeah, and then you even it's like actually difficult to give sometimes. As people will typically give through a church, but then there's like skepticism around how dollars get allocated there. You give through foundations, and there's skepticism around how dollars get allocated there, and you find out that the CEO of the nonprofit made 500 grand from the foundation last year, and it's like, it's just hard to trust without being able to give money, time, help directly to the people who need it, right? So what we tend to do is help the people in our immediate circle, our friends, our family, whatever, when those mechanisms of giving don't exist for the rest of us. But I just think, like, look, as long as money is so heavily in politics and people are so incentivized to just continuously get power, and Congress can keep insider trading, like all of these types of things that just incentivize the worst of us to be in power, versus like the pure moral good people. As long as like we still incentivize that, then that's what we're going to get, right? And then when they do good deeds, typically it's for a reason that is not just pure kindness, right? Like, I think I brought up the example of like, why let so many people through our borders? Well, it's because like eventually they want to transfer the right to vote, and then they'll vote for that party. Like, it's all about just winning an election. They're not doing it for the right reasons. So
Yeah, I don't know. It was kind of a disheartening thing to hear, but I don't know. It sounds like I guess all you can do is just help people in your immediate circle, unless there's a way that you think that people can make a bigger impact, or is that just not possible with the way things are structured in our country?
I don't know. I think, I mean, maybe new technology allows for direct giving at some point. That's just better. Like, I just don't understand why better apps aren't out there yet to be able to do this. But I heard this thing that like the right conservative leaning people generally distrust the government, or like distrust the institutions, and the left leaning people like still have faith and trust in the institutions. Like, that seems to be a general pattern that exists. And but I don't know. I think local, you really want to do more and more on the local level, where institutions can still be decently run, versus like the federal level. Like, I have no problem paying local taxes because I can feel and see the difference in my town. Like, I can actually see them investing in my town. I can see them taking input from us and making changes to their plan based on the public's input. And like, I don't know, just you feel like you have a voice, right?
In the end, let's just be nice to each other. Let's not be dicks. Help people around you. Even if you can't make large scale changes, just help somebody around you. Actually, let's make that a goal for this week. It's Thursday now, but help somebody out this week. See if you can do it over the weekend.
Yeah. Be kind.
Be kind. All right. Speaking of being kind, Roger was not kind to me about my outline, but we're going to talk about perfectionism today.
I've never been kind about your outline.
I know. Maybe you should take your own advice on this. But we thought perfectionism was important. It's something that we both experience pretty often on a day-to-day basis, week-to-week basis when setting goals. And I think a lot of people experience this too. So, the big thing is we want to help people to leverage perfectionism to their advantage instead of just being a ball of anxiety as a result of it. But the biggest thing about it is there are good pieces to perfectionism. And I almost think it's a requirement to be great and to do great things. You have to be so granular with the way you look at yourself and at your goals and at the things you're trying to improve. If you're not a perfectionist, it's almost impossible to get there, I think.
I mean, yeah, perfectionism can also be like I just keep thinking about attention to detail. Mm-hmm. Like, having a high attention to detail is something that people like celebrate, but perfectionism sort of isn't. But high attention to detail is very much a perfectionistic trait. And I just think it's like, we were looking up quotes on like, what's our quote of the day for the pod. And it was like the quotes just go in one of two directions. It's either like perfection is the enemy of progress, like it's bad. It's the enemy of happiness and all of this bad, bad, bad. And then the other part is like, if you strive to be perfect, you will like be incredible. Like, what is it? You shoot for the moon, you still land among the stars types of quotes. Like, it's like, it's one or the other, either be more perfectionism, like, or have more perfectionism or less. And I think what we want to talk about is like, no, it's really in the middle of like, you want some, but not too much. So how do we identify when perfectionism goes from being like really good and driving you towards those goals to becoming like a detrimental thing?
Yeah, so I put together an article here. This is from, let me just give credit here. This is from Elizabeth Scott, who's a PhD, peer-reviewed by Amy Morin. But she put together 10 perfectionist traits that are pretty common. And this is kind of on the negative side, but we wanted to tell the audience just in case you guys feel aligned with some of these things. So there are positive perfectionist traits, but some of the negative stuff that we see is all or nothing thinking. Like, if I can't get this done to a perfect level, I'm a failure. Being highly critical, especially in a negative sense, obvious sign of perfectionism. Being pushed by fear, I thought was an interesting one. Where you're not motivated to do great things. You're not being pushed towards this great thing. You're more afraid of not being perfect. Unrealistic standards, feeling depressed by unmet goals, procrastination when you're worried about not being perfect, defensiveness, if you take this feedback highly critical because you want to be so perfect. And the last one is low self-esteem. So of any of those things that we brought up, do you align with any of them as a perfectionist?
I think being pushed by fear is probably the one that aligns with me most. Like I always had higher goals. And then I think when we talked in our goal setting podcast, like I would communicate those goals out. Like, I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to do that, which was an accountability mechanism, but also like the fear of embarrassment or the fear of like not accomplishing those goals, but also the fear of just like, hey, I run a business, running a business at scale, and it's like scary if you lose a client. And there's always like, oh, what if we lose this? Or what if this happens? Or what if a recession happens? It's like afraid of the macroeconomic environment. We talked about like the news, like every news article you read, like you think it's like just constant doomsday, doom scrolling. It's like, so when you're operating a business and you have a ton of livelihoods that are relying on you, people you're trying to keep employed and growing too, the fear of not being able to grow them or having to take any step back, like drove me to trying to be perfect.
Yeah, for me, it was the low self-esteem one. And I really aligned with the being highly critical. And that kind of led into the low self-esteem. Because when you are a perfectionist, you think so critically about all these micro skills. And like, if we think about it in the volleyball sense, like I need my deep, high passing platform to be perfect when I'm in this situation, going to my left on this type of serve. We're like drilling down to such granular things, and that your passing can be really great. But if this one minute skill of passing is bad, you feel like a failure. So the low self-esteem, I felt that a lot when I was younger and kind of trying to compete on the tour. Just because I was being so critical, and I let it affect the way I thought about my game in general when I would drill down to these minute little things.
Well, I think something that you have really well, and it took me a long time to develop, came to me much later in life, was the ability to turn off these perfectionist traits during competition. Like, it's like when you're training, that's like work. Then competing is like the fun. It's like where you get to just like let the mind go. I'm not worried about my outside arm platform right now. You should be playing free when you're actually competing. And that was like something that it was so hard for me, because I would compete and be constantly analyzing fundamentals, like, oh, I need to bend my knees more, I need to be doing this more, versus like just playing. At that point, you just got to let your training, like, this is the product that you have, put the product you have on the court, and then go back to training on those things later. That's something that I continue to struggle with, but I used to struggle with way more.
Yeah, that's like the enemy of being in the flow state or being in
Yeah.
the zone, right? If you're over analyzing every single move you make, if you're like doing, if you're competing the same way you practice, it's just the enemy of the flow state because you're overthinking, you're trying to fix things. But really, when you're competing, you should just be playing and you just trust all of the work you've already put in, and you let your body autonomously do all the work.
Yep, exactly. There's another example I wanted to bring up here, which was how do you know when you're carrying your perfectionism too far, even in training? It's, I feel like, let's just say I'm working on something for work and then I'm sourcing feedback from people. If I'm getting a lot of feedback, either that sounds similar, then I probably haven't gotten it to a good enough point yet. But when you get to a point where the feedback you're sourcing, and you should always be sourcing feedback in every facet of your life, like how can I be better over here? How can I be better over here? When the feedback starts to be all over the place, that's when you know that it's like just opinion at that point. And so, for example, if you want to get better at serve receive, or you want to get better at passing in general, and everyone just keeps telling you it's serve receive, it's when you're to your right, like you talk to 10 people and 7 of them are saying that, it's probably like, come on, that's really a big thing. But then if you start getting like all over the place, like, oh, it's your hands, oh, it's your platform, it might be your right arm, it might be your left arm. It's like, well, at that point, they're just like, they probably have their own biases coming in there. So when the feedback starts to get more and more scattered, you're getting to the point where you would let your perfectionism go, I think, and ship it. Like, be like, okay, move on to the next thing. Like, I think I'm at a good spot here.
Yeah, that's really interesting because if you allow that feedback to affect you as a perfectionist, then you're going to be in a low self-esteem area. You're going to be highly critical. You're probably going to be down on yourself. So I think that's really interesting that I'd never thought about it like that. So you're listening to people's feedback and seeing if it's directed at one thing or if it's scatterbrained, and then you can either choose to move on from it or just choose to accept it.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it this way, it's like building someone's website. I see it. This is like way more common in work. It's like, let's just say you're building somebody's website for them. It's like if everyone keeps saying, "Oh, this feels cheap," or it doesn't feel like elevated enough, then like, okay, that's probably true. But then if you get to a certain point and someone's like, "Well, I don't like the green versus blue," and then someone else goes, "Well, I would really like to see orange here. I think we should change this little thing." It's like, okay, now everybody's just bringing in all their personal preferences versus like everyone's that's when you probably know that you've hit on it. And these people probably aren't qualified to go any further with that feedback. So I've got to just understand that, like, yeah, like you're sourcing a variety of feedback. You're going to get a variety of bias and various opinions, right? And so when they're in alignment, yeah, act on it. But when they start to get scattered, that's where perfectionism can really crush you, because now you're trying to incorporate all these colors, but every time you fix something, you break something else, and you end up just like working on these little elements for 80% of the time and wasting tons and tons of time.
Yeah, so let's talk about how to use it to our advantage, because I think we both are aligned in that we think perfectionism is almost a requirement to do great things. So
Yes.
for me, it's in training. I think when you are training, you are prepping for competition, you should be a perfectionist. You should be overthinking every single thing and trying to fix things and taking risks and doing things you're not comfortable with in order to grow. The way you use that to your advantage is when you're in the competition day or you're on the sales call or you're in the meeting. At that point, you have to just let go, not overthink, turn off that side of your brain, and just do what you know is right, what your body feels natural with.
Yeah, and understand that like in competition, you're not going to be perfect ever.
Yeah, yes,
Like
great
even
call out.
perfectionism of itself, like in and of itself is like, it's really just like a high attention to detail, like really caring about your output. But you have to be careful not to get in the trap of thinking one mistake means a broader issue every time you mess up something. Like if I'm doing a speech and I say one time, it doesn't mean that like I'm a horrible speaker. Or if I hit one ball out of bounds, it doesn't mean I'm making a ton of errors. Like those, like acknowledging going in that like, hey, I'm always a work in progress. I've done everything that I can to be as perfect as I can leading into this, but like I'm just I'm going to play free and live with the mistakes I make.
Yeah, that's a really good call out. Especially if you think about if I hit a ball and I mishit it and spatch it sideways in practice, pissed off, terrible rep. I need to hit this with better hand contact. If I do it in competition, spatch, mishit, and it still scores, it's still worth 1 point. So like, what's the end goal? You know, if the end goal is to win the game, it doesn't matter how you're scoring as long as you're getting closer to that end goal. In practice, if your end goal is to improve my hand contact on ball, then you need to acknowledge that you're messing that piece up.
Yeah, and then that's what filming and recording is for. Like when Steve, my business partner at Digital Position, when he does sales calls, like he records all of them, but he just like has a good conversation, whatever, and then we go back and be like, if that client goes, I didn't want to work with you, like we went another direction. Okay, let's go watch that one. Why? Let's feel what that energy was like. Let's analyze it. Let's figure out what it was like. Just like in sports, right? Like film yourself when you're competing, and then you can go back and train the elements that seem to repeat themselves or seem to be issues. But like, hey, yeah, it's the emotional involvement during the competition that can really derail you if you start to like analyze everything. And that's why you see really intelligent people actually struggle in competition for that reason. Like, was it Josh Dobbs, who you hear this story? Quarterback. He was they called him the Pastronaut. He came in from so he's unbelievably smart, right? Like he's a rocket scientist, basically.
Yeah, rocket scientist degree, right? Where'd you go to school? Somewhere really good too, right?
Yeah, I don't know, but he's insanely smart. And he comes in from another team to the Minnesota Vikings football last year, and he lights up the league for like 3 games with no prep, like just being sort of like shouted stuff in his ear as he went. And then he just fell off a cliff once he started to like run the offense himself and have more knowledge and things like that. And to me, it was like a classic case of somebody so intelligent that he got put into a situation where he couldn't think because he just had to like focus on the next play, because it was like, I don't even know the playbook. Like I'm just jumping onto a whole new team. I don't even know the names of the guys I'm throwing the ball to yet. Like I'm just
he probably knew Justin Jefferson, but
yeah, that is true. But he's throwing the ball all over the field. Actually, Justin Jefferson was injured too, but and he's just like playing phenomenal. But then when he started to overthink it, you can like just see it, and it's like, man, he probably could be like one of the best quarterbacks, but his being so smart is actually a limiting factor for him. So you see that a lot for like high intelligence people.
Yeah, a good way to see this in yourself, if you ever watch film of yourself, is if you hesitate. Like that's kind of a classic sign that you're overthinking a little bit. Like a good volleyball example is if you have a smooth arm swing, you can just tell when some people are just up and hitting and not thinking, and they're just, I'm going to make good contact and hit this ball. And you can tell sometimes in other people, they kind of like have a hitch or a hesitation on a few pieces of that approach and arm swing, and they're thinking a little too much and not trusting the body. So if you ever see that, I don't know what other examples there would be for like business side, but maybe on a sales call, if you have a hesitation on a sales call, you're overthinking a little bit.
I think what tends to happen when you're overthinking too is you're so focused on yourself. So like in sports, it's like in volleyball, we're always trying to think like, what are they doing? Like who should we serve and why should we serve them? And in business, it's like you're doing a pitch. It's like, what are their needs? What are they expressing as their most important issues that we need to work on? If you get off the call and you can't just rattle those things off the top of your head, then you're probably too self-focused during the call or during the competition. And I found that I would finish a volleyball game and I would be like, oh, I really didn't pass well outside my body and I didn't cut well. If I could just have the cutty. And then it was like, well, what did that team do? And I'm like, I have no idea what they did. Like, I don't even know what they were doing. I just completely lost focus on the game itself, on like, wow, we should have been serving this guy instead of this guy. We should have been doing this instead of this. Like I had no game plan because I was so focused on me. And so can you focus outward on the game as opposed to, or the meeting or whatever, as opposed to just on yourself and your performance?
Yeah, it's great. So I think another way to think about it too is you should be aligned on your end goal before you start this thing. Because again, like think about your end goal when you're going to practice, or if you're practicing for a sales call. It's to improve my speaking cadence, or improve, whatever, how I address points XYZ. In a competition, I want to improve my outside arm passing. In the game, the only goal should be to win. Or in the sales call, the only goal should be to close the sale,
Mm-hmm.
So if we have that goal in mind and we come into competition with that goal, really you can kind of free yourself up to not think about your own things and only focus on the things that will get you towards that end goal.
Yep. Love that.
Okay, so any other things you got in terms of how to use perfectionism to your advantage?
No, I think I want to talk a little bit about our quote because I think it's great.
Hit it.
All right. The quote is, "Perfectionism is self-abuse of the highest order," by Ann Wilson Schaaf.
I think Schaaf, yeah.
Yep. And it's so true because it's like there's this sliding scale of perfectionism where like we don't want too much of it because you get stuck. You don't want too little of it because then you're just not achieving. You're not a high achiever probably. But no matter what, it's like self-abuse because it's like sacrificing and being self-critical. It's like mental self-abuse basically.
Yeah, I like the term self-abuse because it really is, But if you think about like weightlifting, you're breaking down your muscles in order to improve. I mean, perfectionism is kind of the same way, just through a mental standpoint. You're breaking down your own mentality and your own self-esteem in order to improve yourself in the long run.
Yeah, and there's a lot of quotes out there, and it's true. Like, there's a lot of people who just don't have perfectionistic traits at all, and they're like typically very happy. Mm-hmm. like they just don't give an F. Like, right, we did a podcast episode on the art of not giving an F, mm-hmm. right? And this is sort of the antithesis of that, which is like you should give some Fs.
You're giving such a big F about yourself.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. Like, what's the right scale? Like, it's still individual, but you want to accomplish great things. Perfectionism is required, but overdoing it could really hurt you.
Yeah, you need to have it, right? Because if we think about people that we know who you just talked about, when those people compete, they usually compete really well because they're not thinking at all. They're just playing, right? But these people will not have the long-term success because they are not perfectionists and they're not overanalyzing how to improve and how to find the next advantage. That's kind of a requirement in order to reach the next level. But again, like you said, there has to be a mix of both, and you have to be able to turn it off at the right times.
Totally. All right, you want to go play some Fortnite?
Whoo! Let's go, baby. I balled out. First time ever playing Fortnite. Got a win in our second game, so yeah, I'm locked.
Yeah, we hard carried you, but it was fun.
That's kind of funny. Like, I felt like I was balling. I'm like, I had 5 kills. And then you and Grant had what, like 9 each or something?
Yeah, something like that. I don't know. But it was
I didn't do that
was
well.
fun. It's a good time.
Yeah.
All right, man. Thanks for the chat.
Nice work.
You have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Listeners, you have a wonderful day. 2 things today. Think about being a perfectionist, and then also do something kind for somebody. That's a nice little takeaway for us this week.
You!
Let's go, you! Later.